Today on the Locked On Blues podcast, Matthew Tkachuk was traded. Unfortunately, it was not to the St. Louis Blues. Trade broke late Friday night, so haven't had time to react to it until now. But look, today's episode, self-explanatory. Spending the whole time dissecting the trade. Should the Blues have done it? What do the Blues do now? All that fun stuff. Make sure you stay tuned. Gonna be a busy episode. Lots to cover, lots to go over. I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully y'all are too. Let's go.
You're Locked On Blues, your daily podcast on the St. Louis Blues. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Locked On Blues podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and your number one source for daily Blues content. I'm your host, Josh Hyman, as always, and got a fun episode for you today. Going to be completely reacting to the Matthew Tkachuk trade, all the takes, should the Blues have done it, all that fun stuff, and more. Before we get into that, though, I want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, so set the stage. In case you somehow missed it, it's Friday night. You know, I'm starting to enjoy my weekend. Tough 5 days of work, all that good stuff. You know, enjoying the weekend. Recorded a nice podcast for the day. Already uploaded it. Not even thinking about it. You know, thinking a Matthew Tkachuk trade might happen over the weekend. Might happen a week from now. It's not even in my mind at that point. You know, I had a full week of news, pretty much covering it and talking about it and giving my thoughts. And you know, really felt like we hadn't gotten much updates in terms of a trade coming anytime soon. And then literally at 11 o'clock at night, it might have been later, Eastern time for me at least, so it was earlier for a lot of you guys, Central time, but regardless, late at night I get a DM from my buddy, and it's just a Twitter DM, and I don't see the tweet first. I just see WTF, tons of freaking out. He's sending me, I'm like, what the heck could this be? I open it up. Matthew Tkachuk has been traded to the Florida Panthers. My heart drops. I think myself and like a lot of you have pretty much completed the trade in our heads. Ashamedly, I hate to say it, but I mean, I was pretty confident that the Blues were gonna get it done. And when I saw that he was traded to the Florida Panthers, obviously I was let down. I did say on my podcast on Thursday or Wednesday's episode that I think the one team that had maybe a slightly better chance than the St. Louis Blues is the Florida Panthers. They had the cap space. They didn't have the cap space, but they had the assets, I guess I could say, and the willingness, and Florida, no income tax. So I was worried about the Florida Panthers after hearing them on the list, but I wasn't, didn't think it was going to happen like this. So trade comes out. Return takes a little bit, though. So before we even get into the return, it's like, oh my God, I can't believe it. The Blues didn't make this trade. Matthew Tkachuk isn't going to be a St. Louis Blue. This is terrible. A lot of people, including myself, were disappointed. Were frustrated. A lot of people were calling oh, what the heck, Doug Armstrong? What was your plan? You really mismanaged this one. You really screwed up this move. You could have had a franchise-changing player. And I was in that boat. I was like, how the heck do you miss out on a guy like Matthew Tkachuk who, maybe a once-in-a-generation type talent to bring to your team in terms of, the hometown connection, all that stuff. And I was disappointed. And then we found out about the return. And I'm a little less disappointed now. So, the return for Matthew Tkachuk, who is 24, had 104 points last season. The primary asset that they got back is Jonathan Huberdeau, one of the best players in the league. I believe he is the all-time leading scorer for the Florida Panthers. He had 115 points last year. Absolute animal. One of the best players in the league at his position. One of the best forwards in the league. He's 29. His contract is up next year. But he was the primary piece. And you're thinking, holy crap. Now you get why the Blues weren't able to match that. But then you look, and it's also Mackenzie Weegar, a 0.5 point per game defenseman, similar, age range to Huberdeau, a guy that they'll keep on the roster for a long time moving forward. A very, very solid, potentially number 2, number 1 D-man. if at worst, a number 3 or 4 defenseman, plus a pick, and I think there was a prospect in there as well. The return was just absolutely massive, and then it starts to make sense why the Blues didn't go after Matthew Tkachuk maybe as hard as the Florida Panthers. Now, there was a reported offer for the St. Louis Blues that I'm going to go into a little bit later in the episode, but I do want to just talk about the return a little bit and my thoughts on that. Though before I get into that, I'm going to head to a bit of an early ad break just so I have lots of time to talk about the trade, the return, all that fun stuff. So, like I said, today's episode is brought to you guys by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. You can find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information. From live in-game betting, sports, and podcasts, they have you all covered. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts, and I'll be right back with the second half of today's episode. All right. So, let's talk about why this trade made sense for both sides. Why did this trade make sense for the Calgary Flames? Well, put it simple, Matthew Tkachuk didn't want to return there. You're essentially saying, all right, well, we can give him arbitration, get him another year, give him another 2 years, maybe, and then he's gone for nothing. Or you can ship him out and you hope that you make the best for him. You hope you get the best return for him. Why does this trade make sense for the Florida Panthers? They're in a team that's very highly competitive. They have a very young core. They have a very defensive-focused team led by Alex Barkov, one of the best two-way centers in the game right now. Great goaltending, great defense, great offense. Just the President's Trophy winning team. They were a really, really good team last year who just ran into a buzzsaw in the Tampa Bay Lightning. So, would make sense for them to be after a guy like Matthew Tkachuk. And then you think about why are they trading Huberdeau and Weegar? Well, the thing that makes the most sense to me is that Jonathan Huberdeau, at least him, maybe also Mackenzie Weegar, had informed the Florida Panthers that he did not want to re-sign with them after next season because his contract would be up at the end of this upcoming season. Now, is that confirmed? Not at all. From what I've heard, it sounds like Huberdeau just hadn't heard much about his contract extension. He wasn't completely against it, but he just wasn't sure where the negotiations were at, and then the next thing he knew, he was traded, and that kind of rubbed him the wrong way. So it doesn't sound like that was the complete case, that he just walked into the Bill Zito's office and was like, hey, I want out next season, just letting you know I'm not resigning here. I don't think that that's what happened. I think maybe they would rather have Matthew Tkachuk locked up, even if Jonathan Huberdeau is willing to stay, which, look, you're getting yourself a superstar who's very, very young and very, very good on both sides of the puck. He was called a generational talent by Bill Zito. I don't know if he's a generational talent, but he's pretty darn close. He is, there's not a lot of players like Matthew Tkachuk in this league, so from that standpoint, it makes sense. But man, did they give up a haul? I don't think that there's a team in the league who can beat that package willingly. Jonathan Huberdeau is tremendous. He is, like I said, one of the best players in the league at his position. He led the Florida Panthers to their tremendous season that they had this year. And Mackenzie Weegar is a very capable defenseman. But Matthew Tkachuk, as like I said, is a guy that you kind of try to go out and get at all costs. And I mean, the Florida Panthers did that, and we'll see how it plays out next season. And in, the 8 seasons that he's signed, which, speaking of, he did sign an 8-year extension at, I believe, $9.5 million per year. No income tax, no state income tax for Matty in Florida. So he is getting that bag for sure. But yeah, big contract. They got done right away. Apparently the contract negotiations started before the trade call was announced, which seems a little fishy. Or not before the trade was announced, before the trade was agreed to. It sounds like that Florida and Calgary were getting close, and they let Matty know, like, hey, looks like you might go to Florida, and then started talking about the contract before the trade was even completed, which is a little interesting. So who knows when that was going on? But yeah, I mean, I'm saving the inevitable what could the Blues have traded to beat that package for a little bit later in the episode, because I mean, it's all just speculation. I kind of want to focus on the trade just from the two teams involved perspective first. So yeah, let's look at Calgary right now. So the Calgary Flames took a guy in Matthew Tkachuk, who they knew wanted out. Obviously, very disappointing for them. They just lost Johnny Gaudreau. Matthew Tkachuk is a guy that they drafted, had been tremendous for them. Really, really good, looking like he could be the next, face of their franchise. But then all of a sudden he announces that he is not willing to re-sign there, and they're kind of put in a chaos mode where, crap, we can either, try to bite the bullet and get him to change his mind, or we can sell high and get the most for him right now. Because I'm not trying to say he's not going to have a 104-point season again, but he massively, massively, massively improved from his previous season to the one where he put up 104 points. He did have a center on his line that allowed him, and Lindholm, that really helped him get to that point. I still think he's a really good player. I think he's an above point per game player, but there's no guarantee. It's not like he's been producing at that level for years and years and years. And you could say the same thing about Huberdeau. Huberdeau did have a huge season, 115 points, way higher than he'd ever had. So sort of a similar situation. But you're not exactly, getting rid of Connor McDavid, who's been putting up 100 points, a season for the next, or for his first, X amount of seasons in the league. It was Matthew Tkachuk had just broken out, so his value was the highest it had ever been, and maybe the highest it would ever be. That's not a guarantee. He could go out and continue to improve, and I honestly think that he will go out and continue to improve. But just the way that he had that drastic jump up, and the way that the Calgary Flames kind of scored so many goals this season, and he was, Johnny Gaudreau was playing so well as well. There's no guarantee that he will repeat those numbers. So from the Calgary Flames perspective, you're selling on him at the highest point he's had in his career, and then you go out and you bring in not only Jonathan Huberdeau, who instantly becomes the best player on your team by far. I mean, that's not saying much because they did lose Johnny Gaudreau, but still, you bring in a guy like Jonathan Huberdeau, who is an all-world talent, one of the best players in the league. I've said that like 4 times this episode, but still, he is a spectacular player. 115 points, was close to the top of the league in point total this year. And like I said, Florida Panthers were one of the best teams in the NHL this year, and you have to attribute that to Jonathan Huberdeau's play. So you get Jonathan Huberdeau. It's already a win in my mind for the Calgary Flames, just considering the position that they were in. You look at the other offers that were around the league. The Blues, the best player that they probably could have gotten around there was Vladimir Tarasenko, who, no disrespect to Vladimir Tarasenko at all. Jonathan Huberdeau is more valuable than Vladimir Tarasenko, and I think you just, in that situation, you take the trade where you get the most valuable player in return. You could argue that Jordan Kyrou may be more valuable than Vladimir Tarasenko, not more valuable than Jonathan Huberdeau yet. Maybe he will be someday. I wouldn't be surprised if he continued to progress and continued to get that good. Whatever. Besides the point. When you're looking at it from the Calgary Flames perspective, you take the trade where you get the best player in return. And the Florida Panthers far and away offered the best player. And as much as I hate to say it, Mackenzie Weegar might have been better than the second best player that Blues could have offered. Maybe if you put together Vladimir Tarasenko and Jordan Kyrou, then maybe you don't beat, maybe you beat that offer. But I don't think Vladimir Tarasenko would have gone to Calgary anyways. That is a conversation for later on in the episode. But yeah, I mean, from the Calgary Flames perspective, I think you see that as an absolute win. You got the absolute best return you could have for Matthew Tkachuk. It stinks that Tkachuk leaves. I'm sure he was a fan favorite. I guarantee you he was a fan favorite. But you're bringing in 2 players that you can be really excited about, including 1 player that has now become the face of your team, just like that. And I don't know if there were any other teams in the NHL that had a solid, face of the team that they could have given up to acquire Matthew Tkachuk. Now, Matthew Tkachuk becomes the new face of the team, so it's kind of a win-win for Florida in that sense. Do I think that they overpaid? Yeah, but do I think that they're going to regret it? Not really. I think Matthew Tkachuk is good enough to where they can kind of transition and have him for 8 years and rebuild around him. I mean, playing alongside Barkov is going to be ridiculous. They're going to be so good with him. With those 2 on a line together. So it's interesting to see what that's going to turn into. But I mean, it's probably a lot better than I thought Calgary was going to do for Matthew Tkachuk. I thought that they had not a lot of leverage considering that the knowledge was public that he wanted out, but Florida just wanted him so bad that they're willing to beat out everyone's offer comfortably. Now, in the third and final segment, I'm going to be going over what the Blues reported offer to Matthew Tkachuk was, and maybe what they could have done in some dream scenario to beat that Florida offer, and then where do the Blues go from here? That's the third segment. Stay tuned. Okie dokie. So, the St. Louis Blues were reportedly in on Matthew Tkachuk, obviously, and the offer that they made that was denied was Vladimir Tarasenko, Marco Scandella, and a high draft pick. you assume that's a first-round pick. Tarasenko, Scandella, and a first. Is that as good as Jonathan Huberdeau, Mackenzie Weegar, and picks? Not even close. Marco Scandella at that point is just a salary match. I don't think there's any real interest there in Calgary acquiring him. Vladimir Tarasenko probably wouldn't want to play in Calgary, has a no-trade clause. I guess he would have waived it to go to Calgary if that was the Blues' offer. But still, he's a guy that is coming off of a couple shoulder surgeries. Yes, he had a great season last year with the St. Louis Blues, but still probably isn't quite the player that he once was, and isn't Jonathan Huberdeau. So just right off the bat there, that offer is not good enough to beat the Florida Panthers. And they didn't even, according to that, they didn't even throw in any prospects or, didn't throw in Jordan Kyrou. So maybe you say, okay, if Florida wasn't in the race, maybe the Flames counter offer and say, okay, how about instead of Tarasenko, Scandella, and a first, how about Tarasenko, Krug, a first, and Bolduc, and then maybe you have an offer that's on par with Florida. But the fact of the matter is they just didn't get there. And for Calgary, I think it was more about the actual roster players that they were bringing in rather than prospects or young guys, and that was proven in the fact that they got, they got older with this trade. They weren't really concerned about bolstering their youth as much as just still being able to contend, still being able to be in sort of a win now mode. And what the Blues had to offer wouldn't necessarily be what Calgary wanted in that sense. And then you look at then if you wanted to turn it into a roster player trade, then maybe you're looking at Vladimir Tarasenko, Jordan Kyrou, and Torrey Krug, and Colton Parayko, or something like that, and then a prospect and a pick on top of it. And then you're just saying, holy crap, Florida gave up too much with 2 roster players. The Blues probably have to give up 3 in order to match what Florida gave up. Then you're looking at a whole separate group of people mad at Doug Armstrong for gutting the roster. And Doug Armstrong has always been a GM that has focused on having, 4 solid offensive lines and 3 solid defensive pairings rather than, 2 superstars at the top of your lineup and then, roll guys that really aren't that good at the bottom of your lineup and just weigh heavily. That's never been the philosophy for the St. Louis Blues, and that's what they would have needed to turn their team into if they wanted to acquire Matthew Tkachuk in this scenario. They would have had to be a team that relied on their top-end talent, and as fun as that would be in the regular season, that isn't necessarily a recipe for success when it comes to winning the Stanley Cup. Now, obviously, teams like the Colorado Avalanche and the Tampa Bay Lightning have tremendous top-end talent, but they also have depth. And the one thing the Blues would not have if they pay the asking price for Matthew Tkachuk is depth. However, one thing that they would have is Matthew Tkachuk. And it definitely feels like this offseason was a bit of a letdown. In that sense, it feels like they didn't do much. It feels like for a team that feels like they're one legitimate piece away from taking that next level and being a true Stanley Cup contender again, it really feels like they just didn't do enough this offseason. However, I don't think that Matthew Tkachuk was the answer there, and I don't think that what some people think is like, oh yeah, Doug Armstrong was just sitting on his hands, assuming he would get Matthew Tkachuk, and now he's screwed. I think he probably knew that the asking price was too high early on in these negotiations and shifted his focus elsewhere. I don't think Doug Armstrong was all in on Matthew Tkachuk until the very end. It was like, oh crap, plan A has failed. What do we do now? I do not think Matthew Tkachuk was plan A. Unfortunately, I think exactly what the Blues did was plan A in terms of bringing back Leddy, letting Perron go, and just sort of running it back with the same roster minus Perron. And that's disappointing. That's frustrating. But who knows? Maybe they have something else in the works. There's still a couple free agents floating out there. Not that the Blues have money. There's still, trades that could be made. There's still a trade deadline in this upcoming season. I think the Blues are in still a transitional period for them in terms of, some of their aging players getting older and their youth getting better. Next year is going to be very telling to see, can Robert Thomas take that next step? Which, first of all, I think I will just say Robert Thomas would probably have had to be the centerpiece for the Matthew Tkachuk trade, realistically, if the Blues wanted to get Matthew Tkachuk, and there's just no way that happens. There's no way the Blues trade a guy that they just signed to a long-term 8-year deal to be the face of their franchise. There's no way they trade him, and that's realistically the only scenario where I think the Blues could have gotten Matthew Tkachuk without absolutely gutting their roster, and they weren't going to do that. They were never going to do that. So, here we are. Anyways, I'm not as heartbroken as I was at first. I think I've rationalized it and accepted the fact that the Blues never really had a horse in this race when it came down to it, when Florida was offering what they were offering. Matthew Tkachuk was never going to be a member of the St. Louis Blues, unfortunately. Just with the size of that package that Florida was offering, and just the amount of return that Calgary got, they would have been stupid to take any other deal. And I just don't think there's a team in the NHL that would be willing and capable of giving up that much talent for Matthew Tkachuk. And, Florida is probably capable. They have a lot of depth, and as much as they are going to be a little bit more top-heavy next season, I still think that they have the depth to contend, and I think that they know that. So I'm not too upset. I'm not too heartbroken. It's going to be an interesting few weeks to see what else Doug Armstrong has. I would be surprised if the roster that they have now is the complete final roster. But also, I could see it. They upgraded their bottom six forwards a lot, which I still think is going to be a really underrated aspect heading into next season. I think it's going to help out their defensive a lot, having those two-way guys in the bottom six that they added. And I think the defense is going to have, more time to mesh, more time to gel. So we'll see. It's going to be an interesting few weeks. But that being said, that is all the time I have for you guys today. So make sure you hit that follow or subscribe button on whatever podcast platform you're listening to me on. That way you never miss a new episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On Blues. We're getting close to 500 subscribers. Gained a lot of subscribers over the last week with all the Matthew Tkachuk news. Really appreciate that. So if you're new here, appreciate you. Thanks for sticking around. A lot of new people here. Appreciate it. I really like the support. Makes me motivated to post these episodes and give you guys this content. So yeah, continue to support me. Thumbs up the video, comment on the video, or if you're listening on audio, that's fine too. Reach out to me on Twitter. Reach out to Locked On Blues on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok, or reach out to me on Twitter at Josh Hyman NHL. That being said, thank you all so much for listening, and as always, let's go Blues.